Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. I'm going to go ahead and get started in about 30 seconds here, give opportunity for more people to join, but thanks for joining us. It's been probably about a quarter since we did that, so did this webinar, so thanks for joining. As always, before we get started, if you guys have any topic suggestions or development suggestions in general for Finlee, feel free to reach out to us and send that to support@recdigital.com. We are always looking to optimize Finlee and make sure that any development requests from customers are taken very seriously. So feel free to send in suggestions there. So probably a good time to get started since we have a good amount to go over today. The general topics for the webinar today is that we did have a recent release last Monday, and we'll go over what was released, the functionality, in case you guys missed it. There's some cool stuff, especially to the Kanban board that was added. I'm going to go generally over Subledger Reconciliation. I have done that topic before, and as you guys know, I do have to be fairly general when it comes to Subledger Reconciliation there. Sorry, yep, thanks for muting yourself there. So generally I'm going to go over Subledger Reconciliation. I'm going to go over it very high level because it is something that's really specific to your operations and to the application that you're operating in. As you know, Finlee is software agnostic, meaning that it can work for really any application that has the appropriate reporting. So we do have different customers with different applications, so I can't be super specific when it comes to Subledger Reconciliation, but there are some terms and some places to start on each type of reconciliation or Subledger Rec types there. So I definitely want to review that today. A lot of you guys have already been in the system for a long time. Hopefully this is still useful for you all, but it will be fairly broad. So I'm still hoping that you guys get some use out of the definitions and places to start on Subledger Rec items there. As always, we'll leave time for Q&A, but as I always say, if you guys have any questions, you can put that in the chat or the Q&A section. It can be related to the topics I'm talking about or kind of any general questions. So we'll leave time at the end for that as well. So I'm going to hop into Finlee and go into the recent release notes here to go over all the items that have been released. Anytime that a release does happen, we send out an email notification, but we do point you to Finlee documentation to look at what's new and what's been released. So if you go there to the help and support link under Finlee documentation, that's going to open up Finlee documentation. And in the what's new section, the latest version will be on top. So I'll go over what was on that release on August 10th. So the first item that we released is something that customers wanted for a long time. So I'm happy that we were able to finally accommodate that. And customer names have now been added alongside customer IDs on Subledger Reconciliation and Kanban board cards, including all existing and new Kanban board cards. So under the workflow in Finlee, under Subledger Reconciliation and the pending resolved, where customer names exist on the customer list, that is now going to be populated on this field, as well as all existing and past Kanban board cards. So this example tenant in my testing environment doesn't have a lot of customer names because it's just fake customer IDs there. But the customer name will now be displayed and is searchable in cards there too, historically and all new items. So that makes it a lot easier to know kind of what customer it's related to. I know a lot of you don't use customer ID as often as customer names, so now both will be present there, which is a great addition. Customers have been asking for that. I had to wait kind of until a structural change of the customer list on the back end to add that, so that's why it took a while, but we're happy that we now release that. The biggest functionality that was added in the last release is the ability to create new Kanban board columns and rename existing columns. You can also deactivate columns there on the Kanban board. So as you guys should now see, there's an add column button here. So you're able to add, I think, up to 30 additional columns. That's still an incredible amount of columns there. So you're able to add new columns there. I'm just going to name it test. And so the addition of basically as many columns as you want, you can add into Finlee. You can add them drag and drop, but that will also be present in the icon above to be able to move it to that new column as well. And you always have the ability to rename these, even the existing ones, like the pending complete, waiting, reopen. You can rename all of those or add additional ones. That's great in the context of, let's say at quarter end that I know that Minnesota for a lot of customers created an issue where there was a rate change or, a fee if you paid early, reduced the payment there. So a lot of customers had a good amount of customers with a variance related to one tax code. So they they are able to now add that column and then move those cards to that column just to kind of isolate that, maybe there's one variance that's applied to a ton of customers to kind of move that visibly somewhere else so that you could work on your other variances there. So that gives you the option to add different columns for different categories of variances there, just a new way to organize the work that you have to do on Subledger reconciliation, as well as renaming columns. And if you feel like you don't need certain columns, you can deactivate them. Now, deactivating them will completely remove that column. If you have cards on that column and you try to deactivate it, it will say that there's still one active card. Move all cards out of this column before deactivating. So if I wanted to do that and then go ahead and remove it, I have the option to deactivate it once all those cards are removed from that column. So we don't want to delete any of those cards, so you just don't have the ability to deactivate until all the cards are moved off of that column. So the addition of additional columns there and being able to rename hopefully will make the Kanban board more usable for you all to organize your work of Subledger Rec items. There is some additional functionality coming to this soon, probably next week. So look out for a release potentially on Monday. I'm still working on improving that, but it will be fairly probably soon, either next week or the week after. And there is some cool Kanban board, additional things to the Kanban board coming there. So beyond the Kanban board column, which is probably the most noticeable for you all on this last release, we did add a warning message when importing a bank file while the previous bank statement remains open. Users may continue with the import, but closing the previous statement before proceeding is recommended. Not all of you may have encountered this, but it's our general recommendation that on a daily basis, you complete and close out bank reconciliation for all of your accounts. That's the standard. That doesn't mean that you have to do that. But I think some customers, when I was working with them, were unaware that they hadn't closed out their previous bank statement, and then they were rolling forward that statement into multiple statements. So anytime that you don't close out a bank statement and then you just import the next day's bank statement, that's going to roll those statements together. And then the statement date is going to be the latest statement that you had when you closed that out. So we just wanted to give you the opportunity or to notify you that a statement was open before deciding to import that new bank statement, just so that you're aware. Maybe you weren't aware that you didn't close out that previous bank statement. So now it's going to give you a warning and you can actually remove that bank file from being imported, close out that bank statement before proceeding if that's what you decide to do. So I'll show you an example of that. On this test environment, I do have a statement open. I have multiple statements open. So when I go ahead and try to import in a bank file, it's actually going to give me a warning here that the bank statement is open. So bank statement is currently open for the following accounts. So it's telling me the account names as they're displayed in Finlee. So this will just be your bank accounts. The statement date for those. My test data is really old here, as you can tell. I've just used the same test or example data for years and years and years now. I'll tell you the total open number of accounts, and then importing a bank file while a statement is open may affect reconciliation. Do you want to continue? Just saying that, hey, multiple statements are going to compound, basically, if you decide to move forward. If you hit continue, you can import. So that's not stopping you from importing that new bank statement, but it is giving you the opportunity and the warning before you do that. And if you hit cancel, it's going to have another pop-up and saying selecting yes will permanently remove the pending bank files from the import process. This action cannot be undone. Select no to return to review your options. If I hit no, that's going to put me back to the previous, so just saying, hey, these are open, I can continue at that point. But if I say yes, that's just going to say the file is removed, just like typically you have the option to delete those files. It's kind of the same process there. It's just deleting that bank file. Then I have the opportunity to go in, close that bank statement, and then move on to my next import. So that's any time that you're attempting to import a bank file with the previously open statement. It's just giving you that warning there. We thought that was a good addition just so that you're aware that there's an open bank statement, because previously, like, you would have had to go to that reconcile to see if there's any open accounts in that dropdown before proceeding there. And it was kind of giving you the opportunity of that warning before proceeding. So the last enhancement that we had on this last release was upgraded import notification services to improve reliability and performance. This is not anything that you guys would see in Finlee on the UI as you're navigating it. What we were doing, and there was a very few instances, but we did have customers where it appeared that the import was taking a long time, like more than 5, 10, 15 minutes. And that was more that the notifications failed to update than your import failed, or, there's a few different scenarios there. So on the back end, we're doing some upgrades and improvements to the import process, especially related to notifications, like making sure that those notifications of if that successfully imported those files, or if it errored out or warned any of that, was happening faster and more reliably. Just because we had a few instances within the last 6 months of that occurring. So we wanted to do some enhancements on the back end there. So nothing client facing. And then the change that we had is that the reports no longer run automatically when selected. After choosing a report and configuring any desired filters, click run a report to generate results. So you guys may have noticed this change, but any reports under the reports section, it's default not going to run. So our idea behind that is that the majority of the time that you're running these reports, you're applying some type of filter. So when you first clicked on those reports, it was default kind of running without any filters. So if your tenant has a large amount of data, and a bunch of bank accounts, a bunch of data, you're having to wait for that report to first run to then refilter it and run a second report. So we just defaulted it to where you need to apply the customizations that you want to apply so that you can then run the report. So it just takes like 2 extra steps, but I think you guys were already most of the time doing that anyways, customizing the report and running it. So we just default didn't have it run. So what it's giving you now is a message to click customize, choose your filters, then run to generate the report. So 9 times out of 10 on the liability variance, what I'm doing if I'm running for a customer, we're going through a training or going through any Subledger Rec items, I'm going and putting a variance threshold of $1, maybe grouping by tax code if that's applicable to your tenant there, and then allowing it to run there rather than having to wait for it to run, apply the filters, and then run it again. So that's the change that was made there. So we hope that you like the additions of the items, especially to the Kanban board on the last release. Hopefully that will help you organize your Subledger Rec items more. And we just want to increase visibility, especially of Subledger Rec items, as much as possible. So that was the thought behind that. As always, and what I stated at the beginning, if you guys have any development suggestions for us, we take client suggestions very seriously. This is made for payroll softwares and payroll reconciliation specifically for service bureaus. So it's made for you all. So we're trying to make that as user-friendly and tied to payroll service bureau processes and operations as much as possible. Again, it is a little software agnostic, meaning we work with a lot of different payroll service bureau softwares. So, we can't do anything specific to that software, but we're trying to make it standard across all payroll software. So there's some exciting things coming, especially next week. We expect to have another release with some more Kanban board changes. So definitely look out for those release notes. Any questions, feel free to send us questions at support@recdigital.com. So I'm going to go back to my PDF or PowerPoint here. And we're going to move to the second section of recommendations for Subledger reconciliation. Again, just another stipulation. We do have to be fairly general when it comes to Subledger reconciliation, but I still hope that you guys find these tips and tricks useful. So I'm going to move first to my general recommendations for subledger reconciliation. There's going to be general truths for everyone. And I want to step back and just talk about subledger reconciliation and the importance of it really, really quickly. I try not to get on my soapbox too much on these webinars, but we're all really passionate about reconciliation in general for service bureaus because we know the importance of client funds reconciliation, and the secret ingredient, or the most important ingredient to reconciliation in general, is subledger reconciliation and completing that on a daily basis. It's great to import all activity to tie in the ending bank balance that you do during bank reconciliation, and with ledger reconciliation, ensuring that all of that data of the bank balance is following the ledger. That's all absolutely critical. But on a daily basis, to know that each customer that is allocated, like has amounts allocated for each of those bank accounts, that has like mutual funds in each of those bank accounts, that you're holding the right amount of money per client, is so essential. And that's what subledger reconciliation does. And that is the most important ingredient and final step of reconciliation. So I can't emphasize enough how important subledger reconciliation. And there's a lot of different definitions that people have of reconciliation. And most of the time that just ties out simply to bank reconciliation. But I always use Jennifer's example that she told me years and years and years ago. If you're trying to, like in the olden days, how you would write out and balance your bank account, like it's really important. The process of bank reconciliation is the equivalent of writing out what happened to your bank account there, but actually validating that what occurred is valid is what subledger reconciliation is, and allocating that out per customer is critical. If $100,000 hit my bank account, well, first of all, NSF, but there, but if $100,000 hit my bank account and I just wrote down that it happened, like, and not looked any further into if that was valid or not, that's basically not useless, but it's not valid just writing down that it occurred. And that's what bank reconciliation is. I need to validate that that was actually valid to happen. And that's what the process of subledger reconciliation is. So again, I'll get off my soapbox there. But the general subledger recommendations here, just a quick overview before we talk about the specific subledger rec items, is I definitely recommend, and this should be automatic process for everyone, that you hit find variances after the close of bank reconciliation. That find variance button not only calculates ledger reconciliation, but will recalculate subledger reconciliation and the pending resolve tab. So it should really just be second nature and default for you guys to hit after the close of reconciliation, bank reconciliation, on that reconcile tab, that you navigate to workflow and hit find variances. That should be the automatic process after bank reconciliation is complete. That not only captures like the ledger reconciliation report at that time and recalculates ledger reconciliation, gives you and presents anything new and gives you the most up-to-date information on subledger rec and pending resolved. I always tell you all to hit that find variances, go to pending resolve first, because the point of subledger reconciliation is to make sure that when you go through the workflow there of hitting find variances, pending, going to pending resolved, resolving all of those, which moves all open Kanban board cards that have resolved to that closed column, then go to subledger rec. You know that when you add everything from that pending resolve tab and from subledger reconciliation, that everything on the Kanban board is as up to date as possible. So you know that you're working with the most recent variances that are still open and all the new ones that you added there. So first go to review and resolve pending resolve first, because people tend to forget that that tab exists and they don't resolve those, moving open cards to the complete column. And you could open a card that is no longer valid and has since resolved if you don't go to that tab. So I always recommend doing that. And then kind of in the same breath I just talked about it, add all subledger rec items to the Kanban board daily. Some of you, not you specific, I don't know exactly who's on here, so I'm just trying to call anyone out specifically, but I have seen customers that just maintain the list on subledger reconciliation of all cards and never add them to the Kanban board. The point of the subledger rec tab is to report any cards that have not been added to the Kanban board, that have since updated or are new. If you don't add those on a daily basis, you don't know that the subledger rec tab itself is all new items, or if it's been pre-existing items that you have that have been kind of rolling day to day to day. So the whole point of adding all the Subledger Rec cards, even if there's a lot of them, the whole point of that is that you know that that's all the newest information since the day prior that is presenting or updating on the Subledger Rec tab. So that's really important to add those on a daily basis. That's definitely our general recommendation there. The last item here, I believe it's the last item. And anytime that, if I was the one that trained you on Subledger Reconciliation, I just wanted to do kind of a general reminder. Addressing aged and cleared items first is going to be my recommendation. I think it's pretty vital to address those first, and I'll kind of make that apparently clear when we go over the aged and cleared item, why that's the case. That's why I recommend that. So address aged and cleared items first is really my general recommendation, and I'll kind of reinforce that here in a second. Before we go on to the specific types of Subledger Rec items, I wanted to define kind of two terms really quickly for you all, because it goes to the concepts of Subledger reconciliation and why or how we resolve things. So you'll see that there's a field for resolution types in those cards there. And there's two general ways that we can resolve Subledger Rec items. And I kind of always say that there's only two ways to address things, kind of generally. And again, I'm being very general here today. So there's only two ways that we can resolve things, and that's doing either a system update or funds being over or short. So if I am talking about system update, and let me define that really quickly. System of record needs to be updated if we're categorizing something as a resolution type of system update. This could be Finlee, your payroll application, or the tax payment processing system that requires a system update. So when we're talking in terms of resolving something, there's either a monetary impact or the system of records that you're comparing, something needs to be updated. And we'll go kind of into more detail as we go through each of the Subledger Rec items. So the second type here of the resolution is that over short funds, that this is defined by the resolution having a monetary impact. The resolution requires a refund or collection or money movement needs to occur. So I always look at any type of Subledger Rec item in these two terms of either the systems that I'm comparing, something needs to be updated so it's not a monetary impact, or there is a monetary impact and I need to take some corrective action, either moving funds kind of internally within banks if I move funds to the wrong bank, or I need to collect a refund from a customer. So I'll stop here to see if there's any questions before I go into the specific rec types here. I don't see anything in the chat or Q&A, so if there is specific questions on anything that I've talked about, feel free to put that in the chat or Q&A, or you can even like raise your hand on this. I don't see anyone. Perfect. And so we're going to go to the first one here. So Subledger Rec type, the first one I suggest addressing is an aged and cleared item. And so I'm going to define what an aged and cleared item is. I think it'll be a good refresher just so that you all know kind of the Subledger Rec types that make up Subledger Reconciliation. So aged and cleared ledger transactions are ACH transactions in the ledger that have aged or not cleared when expected. Our ledgers are comprised of individual transactions. Those individual transactions, when you import them, are outstanding and we expect them to clear the bank. So as you're importing ACH files, tax payment files, anything that is relative to the activity that we expect to happen on the account, those individual transactions are making up the customer ledger and the overall balances. And we need to validate that all of those transactions clear the bank. Because if you expect that impound to happen, if you expect that tax payment to happen there, we need to ensure that that actually did clear during bank reconciliation. So like, let's say that you guys are caught up on current bank reconciliation of 8/18. If there's something dated like 8/17 or prior, typically, if you have that number of aged uncleared item or days, number of days set to 1, then that's going to notify you of, hey, we expected this impounder payment to clear, but it has yet to clear. So this is ensuring that everything that makes up your customer ledgers is in fact clearing timely. Now, we can only imply that something should clear timely if it's an ACH transaction, kind of implying it's a non-check transaction. So this rec type only applies to non-checks. So if a check number filled, the check number filled is populated, or the transaction type is check paid, like we expect it to be a check that clears the bank, then we don't let it fall under this category of aged uncleared item. That's why we really recommend running outstanding ledger transaction report, even the outstanding checks report, on like a monthly or quarterly basis, especially after the period when it's eligible for achievement there. So aged uncleared items are really just individual transactions on the ledger. We're saying, hey, has this cleared timely? And we're referencing the last closed bank statement there. So I am going to go over each subledger rec type and saying where to start. So again, I can't like walk through a resolution of each type. If you guys feel like you don't quite have the process down of resolving subledger rec items, which is probably the hardest part of reconciliation in general, feel free to schedule time with any of us. You can email support@recdigital.com, email me, email Sharon, who you typically work with as well. And we can schedule time to go through your specific operations, because your operations, your payroll software, the files that you upload have a direct correlation to the subledger rec items that you're getting. So you need the context of what software you're operating on, your operations. We know your accounts pretty well and we can advise on that. So I have to be fairly general here. But because aged uncleared items are referencing individual transactions that have not cleared, you need to review that transaction on the search ledger. That's the place to start. Start looking on the search ledger, and you'll hear me 9 times out of 10 say go to the search ledger for start here on all of the subledger rec types. But you need to review the transaction on the search ledger to start researching why it's coming up as an aged uncleared item. The last category that I'll go over on each of these subledger rec types is how the categories of resolution here. It follows the defining terms of a system update or over short funds, and you'll find that that's kind of the category of resolution of all of these, but I kind of stipulate them a little differently depending on the type of subledger rec item. So the system update category here is because we're looking at an individual transaction. If it's a system update, and we determine that's a system update, it's because the transaction is invalid and needs to be voided. So a good example of that is maybe you are UKG MasterTax, or you just use MasterTax as your tax payment processing system, and you are clearing out like year-to-dates that you accidentally marked as paid there, and then they came up on the deposit analysis, meaning like they got imported into Finlee, these tax payments that are invalid and never should have occurred. You didn't send them, but they came over on reports because you're kind of clearing them out and you mark them as paid, which would indicate that we expect them to clear the bank. So if there's a tax payment that's not valid, and you know for a fact it's not going to clear, the system is indicating that it hasn't cleared and it just needs to be simply voided. That's a great example of a system update in Finlee that does not have a monetary impact. It's just saying that this transaction isn't actually valid. I don't want it to occur. It's not going to occur, so I'm going to void it. There is a monetary impact to some aged uncleared items, so I don't want you guys just to assume that it needs to be voided. That's kind of the default for some customers. Like, oh, it's aged uncleared item. It hasn't happened, therefore it shouldn't have happened. That's not always the case. So there's some indication that a transaction still needs to be initiated if it does have a monetary impact. So a good example of that is especially during quarter end, when your tax team is making tax payments and marking them as paid, sorry, just 1 second. I'm just going to avoid mute someone there. Sorry if you had a question there. So if like a transaction is outstanding, a tax payment, especially related to quarter end, because this is a common practice at quarter end, let's say that your tax payment person went into MasterTax, marked something as paid, and said, hey, I'm going to go on to the state website and I'm going to make this payment. And then they get drawn into something else. They forget to make the actual payment there. Well, they marked it as paid. They expected to pay it, but they didn't actually pay it online. So that payment is still outstanding in the ledger. It should have happened, but it didn't. So I don't want you guys to default expect it to be voided because it didn't occur. You need to assess if it should have happened. If it should have happened, then you need to take some corrective action to make sure that it did. That could apply for impounds. Like if you have an amendment and you're holding on to the impound just to make sure that once you flesh that amendment out, that you do actually need to collect and pay that on behalf of a customer. It is common for customers not to then release that impound and like forget to send that impound to the customer. That gets brought into the Finlee system, but you guys didn't actually make the collection, that sort of thing. So definitely make sure on each uncleared items, these are the individual transactions that make up your overall ledger, like your customer ledger balance. So we need to make sure that one, they're valid, and two, that they're clearing timely. So Asian cleared items are really important to ensure that things are clearing when they're supposed to, and that your ledger is comprised of valid transactions. And why I talk about doing those first is that because they directly impact your overall customer balance, then they impact the two other categories of types that we're going to go over, which is the negative or positive balance and the liability variance, because those are comparisons of your overall customer balance, which are comprised of those individual transactions, which we're kind of first checking if they're clearing timely, if they're valid transactions through the Asian cleared item. So I really hope that that's clear of why I recommend going over the Asian cleared items first. So the second category we're going to go over here is negative and positive balances. I grouped them together. They are two separate Subledger Rec items, but they're so closely related to me that it makes sense to go over them together because negative and positive balances are 99% of the time related to non-tax ledgers. The negative balance, that's not always the case, but again, I'm not going to go into too much detail today. But it's really most of the time a non-tax ledger balance by client that is less than or more than zero. Let's imagine that for your client funds that you're holding that are non-tax, let's say you have direct deposit and trust accounts, or I don't know, the positive pay is another word for trust. There, accounts where you're issuing out checks on behalf of employees or agencies, that sort of thing. Let's imagine that those are all customer ledgers that should be maintaining a $0 balance because your impound should correspond to the checks that you issue off. And then you have a whole series of checks that are pending for a while, but overall, like your impound matches your checks. So you should always be maintaining a $0 ledger balance overall there. We need to report anytime that those customer balances either go into the positive or go into the negative. So those report as either negative balances or positive balances there. I will stipulate really quickly that negative balances can report for tax ledgers. I should have probably included this as a stipulation in this. If your ledger balance and your liabilities are both in the negative and they match, that's not a liability variance because that's a comparison of your ledger versus outstanding liability, but your overall customer balance is in the negative. That's very uncommon. That's why I say 99% of the time you're not reporting as a negative balance, but depending on your tax payment processing system, if that allows liabilities to go into the negative, it's possible that you'd get a negative balance. So sorry for the confusing stipulation there, but most of the time it's a non-tax ledger that should maintain a $0 balance that goes either into the positive or into the negative. So that's the definition of a negative or positive balance. I'm going to say similar things at the start here, but I mean, 99% of the time, we're going to go to the search ledger first. I mean, when I trained a lot of you, I probably made the joke that the search ledger is going to be your best friend. That's because 9 times out of 10, you're going to start there when you're researching these Subledger Rec items. So review the overall balance of the customer ledger on the search ledger for this type of, whether it be negative or positive balance. You can have multiple bank accounts under a ledger. So let's say that you have a trust ledger that you have a positive balance on. If you have multiple bank accounts, I would probably just use the filter on the search ledger of trust, just so that you capture everything because it is by overall ledger, which could maintain multiple bank accounts. Let me make that not so confusing and go back to Finlee really quick. And under this workflow here, if I had multiple bank accounts, that's impacting my overall customer ledger balance, whether it be positive or negative under that rec type there. So just maybe on the search ledger, use the ledger filter instead of the bank account filter. That's kind of a side note there. So definitely start by reviewing the overall balance of the customer ledger on the search ledger. A customer asked me, actually, I think it was yesterday, they have a customer that has thousands of checks that are issued on every single payroll, and they have a positive balance, so it's really hard to research. My general recommendation for researching kind of a lot of history of a customer that has a positive balance on their trust account is download the search ledger once you filter by customer and by ledger, a trust ledger in this instance, and then filter by date and then sum by date. And you need to kind of eliminate the dates that you're looking at to kind of isolate where the transactions are out there. But if you're doing Subledger Rec on a daily basis and that positive balance just came up, you know it's something that happened yesterday, and that's a big added benefit to doing Subledger reconciliation on a daily basis. But that's kind of my general recommendation. If you're looking at trust that's out of balance, try to first sum by date. And if the collection and the checks were issued on the same date, great. Like any non-zero sums would be where you'd look first. There. Categories of resolution. The system update, it's similar to uncleared items. If there's transactions that are valid or invalid that need to be voided, I said that in a weird way. Transactions that are invalid and need to be voided, that could be impacting your overall balance. You'd catch that first in aged uncleared items if they're ACH, but this happens a lot on trust accounts when it comes into regards like with checks. So if you have checks and you're not voiding the checks in your system of record, like let's say your iSolved or UKG, and it's not coming over as a void into that checks import, so it's not voiding outstanding checks. Like let's say you refund a check to a customer for $50. So we see a reduction of $50 on that customer ledger, but we also see the check outstanding. Like you may need to void that check because it's no longer outstanding if your checks report isn't voiding it for you, basically, if there isn't like a void scenario set up on your tenant. So it could be possible that beyond age uncleared items, you have invalid transactions that need to be voided. The checks, having a check that's still outstanding, that's no longer valid or should be outstanding, is a great example of that in this context. And then a lot of times too, there could be a refund or collection that needs to occur related to like escheatment processes, again, related to the trust is probably the most common there. Like if you refund or need to refund customers, like let's say you go and void all these outstanding checks that are more aged than 6 months when they're available or eligible for escheatment, then you need to like refund the customer those funds as well. So that's very common on negative or positive balances there. So the last type, and I will stop yammering at you all here in a second, and you guys will have some time for Q&A at the end. It's probably the most common variance type or the highest volume variance type, and is very, very critical in general, especially the tax reconciliation is usually the most complex, and the meat of that happens, or the majority of that happens in liability variances. So it's very important to understand what these are and what, like where to start on them, how to resolve them. How to resolve them, I can't specifically talk about today because it's so specific to each one of you all, but I'm hoping that the definition and where to start and the types of general resolutions will aid you in this reconciliation. Subledger reconciliation is a tax ledger balance by client or by tax code, if you guys have that option, a few of you do, that differs from the total outstanding liabilities. Liability variances aren't inherently simple, but the concept of them are. I don't mean to belittle it by any means, but if we understand that we're just comparing the total ledger by customer, like the tax ledger, to what you're responsible for paying out in the future. So that's outstanding liabilities, tax liabilities at a point in time. Then that's really all it is. Like we're comparing ledger, which is the history of the transactions that have cleared, the impounds and tax payments. So really theoretically what's remaining is any impounds that have yet to be paid out. Those impounds that have yet to be paid out should correspond to the tax payments that are pending there. So that should always be true. Tax reconciliation is hard in that you're always holding money for customers because there are like semi-weekly that have yet to be paid out, or quarterly or annual that have yet to be paid out. But comparing those to what should be paid out, like those should always be in balance with each other. As you make tax payments, they drop off the outstanding liabilities, so that reduces, and so does your ledger. So your ledger balance should always be following your outstanding liabilities. I'm not sure if the hand movement's helping with that, but that makes sense to me in my mind. So that tax ledger balance by client, that differs from the total outstanding liabilities. Now, there could be a million different reasons why those are out of balance, and that's what makes tax reconciliation hard. But that's the general concept, and we need to go back sometimes to the general concept to make sure that we have the right context to view and start analyzing why that variance is happening. So starting here, the recommendation is the same as the others. You're going to review the overall balance on the customer tax ledger on the search ledger. Again, if you are doing reconciliation on a daily basis, adding on new cards, if that has updated or you have a new addition of a liability variance, you know that something changed within the last day. So keeping that up to date makes reconciliation inherently easier. So if something goes out of balance, you know it's something that happened yesterday. So you can look even on the ledger of a posted date of today, or, and see any thing that occurred yesterday, and that could show you what the out of balance is. So keeping up to date, it's easier to remember things that happened yesterday. Your tax team will remember things that happened yesterday. Will you remember something that happened a week ago, a month ago? It's a little harder, right, than something that happened yesterday. So reviewing overall balance on a customer tax ledger on the search ledger is where you first start. I always look for anything that looks odd. You guys have a lot of experience with payroll operations, money movement of client funds. Like, you guys know what is typical, what isn't typical with your experience. So kind of utilize that experience, see what recently happened, and then you're going to be able to see somewhere to start. If your ledger looks fine and that looks valid, then because all we're doing is comparing the ledger, tax ledger, to outstanding liabilities, now's the time to look at your outstanding liabilities. So I think that's always good to pull your outstanding liabilities there to see if they're valid as well. So if your tax ledger is off in Finlee, if your outstanding or there's some difference between your ledger and your liabilities, it's either one that is wrong, right? So you're pulling the ledger within Finlee by looking at the search ledger, or you're pulling your outstanding liabilities and looking at that detail of that customer too. So one of those two is wrong. And just like the categories of resolution that I've been talking about and the other reconciliation types here is the same. So the system update or overshort funds apply to this too. Now, there's just so many more factors that go into it. So I understand why this one is more inherently confusing, but the same principles stand. So if a system update is required, it's saying the system of record that has incorrect information needs to be updated. Here's an example: master tax pending liabilities have invalid year-to-dates. Maybe not the best description of that, but like if I pull my ledger that looks correct, and then I start looking at the outstanding liabilities, and I realize there's outstanding liabilities that shouldn't be there. Like, let's say that you processed a year-to-date, you pulled it into master tax, you left them pending, but you never collected them. That's inherently going to increase your outstanding liabilities that you don't have money for on your ledger. So if those aren't valid outstanding liabilities, they shouldn't be pending. If you put them as held or you mark them off so that they get paid, cleared out, that sort of thing, whatever your operations is, then they're going to drop off that outstanding liability report that you updated the master tax system. Inherently, that's a system update, and that resolved that variance because your outstanding liabilities were overstated. It's not always implied when you have a liability variance that you're out or over money. What it's saying is that simply the tax ledger is different than the outstanding liabilities. That could inherently be because of the systems that you're comparing. Like, so let's go with the example that I had, UKG master tax and your bank. Like, you're comparing and importing files from UKG, like your impounds typically happen from there. You move over liabilities from UKG to master tax. You make payments out of master tax. So you're comparing those two systems by importing like deposit analysis, liability analysis from master tax, and then you're confirming that it happened through your bank. So you're importing files from 3 different systems, and you're making sure that all of those are flowing with each other, that you're reporting, and that your ledger balances in Finlee versus all of the expected activity. And then we finalize that by doing bank reconciliation there. So it could be that one of those systems of record, including Finlee, has transactions that aren't going to happen. You handle those during aged uncleared items, or their checks that need to be addressed there. So sometimes systems of record are incorrect. reporting something incorrectly because human error or maybe a system error. I've seen system errors too, of like liabilities that just didn't get marked as pending, which should have been, but you collected for them. That would show the type of liability variance that needs to be addressed. The last item here is truly when there is a refund or collection that needs to occur, and that's why we're out of balance there. At any given point, and just I'm stressing this again, even though I've said it a couple times, at any given point, the net amount that you have left on your tax ledger should be enough to cover all your future responsibilities for that customer, for that tax code if you're balancing by tax code. So if you underpay a tax payment, so you're holding too much money for them, like that's the client's money, you need to refund it back. If you double paid a tax, like they're going to get a refund from the agency, you need to recoup what you overpaid out of your account. Because you guys are usually holding one tax account with a lot of customers' money, that's not your money, and one customer's money is not the other customer's money. You can't use that to float overpayments, underpayments, that sort of thing. So it's really important that by customer, you know exactly what's allocated of that mutual bank account that you have, like the one bank account that you have for a ton of customers. You know what belongs to them, and you're not also using other customers' fund to cover like overpayments for a customer, or the fact that a customer NSF'd and didn't collect, that sort of thing. I think it's really important to make sure that you're appropriately utilizing and allocating out that money per customer that you're collecting and paying on their behalf, because it isn't your money. You'd want your money into someone else's account to be taken very seriously as well. So again, I'll get off my soapbox on that one. But so Subledger Rec types, again, liability variances are probably the most common that you have, and maybe the most complicated to know what the resolution is, because there's a lot of variables that go into that. I just want to stress again that you can reach out to us if you feel like you can't resolve a Subledger Rec item. We're happy to go on with you and help you work through it. Sometimes you just need to talk to your tax person. Sometimes you need to flesh something out to see kind of what went wrong. Because Subledger Rec is only presenting you the out of balances, then you're only seeing everything that went wrong. You're not seeing the 95, 97% of things that went right that didn't cause a variance. You're just seeing things that operationally went wrong. And sometimes operationally something went really wrong because we have humans doing it. It's just human error is an element of it, even though it's probably a very small percentage. That's all you're seeing. So sometimes it's hard to anticipate what actually went wrong. So Subledger reconciliation is very vital there, and I hope that that general overview gave you a refresher on it, or maybe just a little bit different perspective of the order in which you should do them, why they're connected, how they're connected, and why they're important. So I will leave a few minutes here at the end. This is longer than I usually go, so thanks for sticking with me, y'all. But I hope that this was useful. We have a full release hopefully happening next week, but probably the week after, if not next week. So look out for that. I will hang around for a few minutes, but thank you all for joining today.